Hello, everybody. Good morning. Once again, we invite all of you, all of our lovely, lovely speakers and audience to join us for Diplomacy Spotlight Hub. It's an initiative by the Indian Forum for Public Diplomacy where we interview speakers, experts in the field of international relations. Today, we have with us Admiral Monty Khanna. So we are so delighted to hear from you, seek some inputs, and gain a lot more knowledge about the domain that a lot of our audience members are interested in. So I'll quickly pass on the mic to you to give us a very brief introduction, and then we can begin with our podcast.
Thank you, Tanya. Delighted to be here, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this forum. A few brief words about myself. I'm essentially was a career naval officer for the better part of around 35 odd years. Did the younger part of my career in submarines. That's where I had several interesting sort of years. Was fortunate, in 86 to 88 to spend 2 years in the Soviet Union, in the dying throes of the Soviet Union in Riga, which is now an independent country. Have had a number of interesting tenures after that. Commanded a couple of ships, and thereafter I went on to become the Naval Attaché in Washington D.C. for a little over 3 years. It was a interesting time because that was a time I would say I'm talking about from 2008 to 2011, where our relationship was really ramping up, and we are seeing signs of that right now. Came back and thereafter came back to Delhi, where I was looking after foreign cooperation and intelligence for the Navy. And thereafter, I moved on to Goa, where I took over as a commandant of the Naval War College, where I spent the better part of 4 years, and finally retired from Wellington, where I was the Chief Instructor Navy. After that, I spent 4 years at the National Security Council Secretariat as the Assistant Military Advisor. A very interesting times, seeing things from a different perspective, a much more sort of apex. Enjoyed my stay over there, and now I have come and settled here in Goa. So that's me.
Thank you so much. I think most of our young colleagues and the audience members would be so interested to hear about all these lovely postings. Can we, sir, hear a little more about your time in Washington, D.C. and at the time, you did talk about India and America, especially our naval relations. Perhaps would love to hear more about that.
So DC was an interesting time. Actually, when we went to DC, this was the time of the financial crisis. So there was, I would say, a considerable amount of, internal disturbance. And these were heady years also because Obama had just been elected as the president. So a lot of, particularly I would say in the youth, a lot of aspirations, so it was a complex, really time, and it was interesting to see how they came out of that. So that's from the economic and the political side. On the military side, of course, it was these were the years where I would say the Indo-Pacific concept was sort of gaining steam. It was in its infancy really at that time, and there was a strong outreach from the U.S. side to enhance our mill-to-mill cooperation. There was some baggage that we used to carry in the going back to 71. We are all aware of the U.S. position in those days, etc. And therefore, I would say there was some hesitancy on our side. But I think with time and with a concerted amount of effort put in from the US side, those concerns were gradually dispelled and our relationship became a lot more robust. What you're seeing today, a few big ticket deals took place at that time. The biggest, of course, was the P-8I, which is a primary maritime reconnaissance aircraft that we had. And apart from that, of course, on the Air Force side, there were the C-17s, C-130s. So it was even from the equipment side and a large number of joint exercises which were really ramped up. Several visits that would take place, Indians coming to the US coming to India. So it was a busy time, but an interesting time. Yeah.
Rightly, you've mentioned the relations being absolutely robust at the time. I also did want to understand from you that in a very recent past, we, especially with the US and France and extra regional powers, having freedom of navigation operations or FONOPs in the South China Sea has been one activity that's got a lot of attention, especially media attention overseas. What do you think, sir, is India's stance on this, especially when it comes to maintaining a regional stability with such partners, US, France?
No, I think from philosophical standpoint, and then I would say even otherwise, are committed to freedom of navigation. And therefore, we would like to see unhindered access to the global commons. And the maritime space is one of the principal global commons, along with cyberspace and outer space. And therefore, there has to be a rule-based order. That rule-based order is the primary, I would say, document or the primary regime for that rule-based order is UNCLOS. And therefore, adherence to UNCLOS and its principles is fundamental to the way that we look at the maritime space. If parties are, enforcing that, then we've got no quarrel with that. And we would therefore, in a way, we may not participate because of logistic reasons, etc., in distant operations. But I don't think we have any issue with anyone trying to enforce legal regimes, particularly under the ambit of UNCLOS.
Noted. So wanted to also take a little more understanding, perhaps, on the recent inclusion, of course, of the African Union with the G20, and there's a lot more focus, renewed focus on our partnership, bilateral partnership with the African states. Djibouti is one such interesting country, and since you very, very passionately, and for the audience members also to sort of understand, written about the topic. It is one of those military bases, including, China, France, United States, having interest in the nation. Do you think, in any which ways, the geopolitics have really changed with our naval stance when it comes to Djibouti and the kind of relations we've had in the past?
So Djibouti is an interesting location, as you've mentioned, and I think Djibouti really, the advantage, of course, is geography. They're right there at the Horn of Africa. It's at the entrance of the Straits of Bab el Mandab, which is the entrance to the Red Sea. It juts out, and it's a nice, safe harbor, and therefore there is a lot of interest. And I would say, in the surrounding countries, if you take Somalia, if you take, Sudan, if you take, Eritrea, there is some degree of political unrest, but Djibouti, that is relatively stable. So therefore, I think it becomes an ideal location to locate a facility. The early entrants, of course, were the French. In fact, they were, they historically have been the power that has been operating out of Djibouti. And after that came the Americans with Camp Lemonnier. It's a massive base, the largest base, in fact, they have in Africa is Camp Lemonnier, but they don't have a waterfront. The Americans don't have a waterfront. It's the airfield on one side of the airfield that they're located. And then you have the Italians, the Spaniards, I think to the Germans, and the Japanese. The Japanese, the first overseas base that they've set up is actually set up in Djibouti. So it's busy. And the newest entrants, of course, are the Chinese. The Chinese have, not gone. They have, I think, from an infrastructure standpoint, their footprint is the largest. So they've set up a large base over there. It's got a large jetty, more than 300 meters, in fact, capable of even berthing an aircraft carrier. And it's a small helicopter strip of, I think, 400-meter length. So it really can't be used for fixed-wing aircraft, but certainly for helicopter operations. So the entry of the Chinese, I think, while there was a certain amount of, there's a historical comfort level with, Western powers being there. It's the entry of the Chinese, which has been the latest development, 2008 onwards, which has, happened in Djibouti. And that, I think, the first Chinese overseas base that has come up. So, it is a bell ringer, I would say, of further developments which are likely to take place in the area. So everyone is watching closely. And that, I think, is the big ticket change as to what the utilization is going to be and how this model is likely to be replicated in different parts of Africa and different parts of the globe. So it's an interesting time for everyone. Yeah.
Absolutely, sir. I also did want to understand, especially with recent state visits, head of state visits of two African countries, namely Tanzania and Kenya last year. There's been a lot of inflow of ministerial delegations coming, a lot of bilateral talks happening. From a commercial and an economic standpoint, yes. There's a lot to look forward to. But do you think, especially when it comes to strategic partnerships, is there much to look forward to with such maritime neighbors? Are they maritime neighbors? Would you also call them strategic allies? So I've sort of divided that question into three parts.
So, allies, I would say, is a strong term. I would prefer to use the term as strategic partners. I think that is a better term to use because allies has got, different connotations where you have a legal regime that comes into place. You have I would say it becomes incumbent upon an allied partner to intervene in case of an armed issue, etc. In a partnership, it's much more, I would say, flexible in this respect as to you can calibrate the degree of, but it gives you certain guidelines. Certainly, Africa is of great interest to us on many counts. I mean, we've got firstly traditional ties with Africa. We've been engaged with Africa historically for years together. It's very much part of the IOR, which is really an area that we need to be concerned about in our larger periphery around the nation. Our trade routes pass very close, from to the coastline, etc. The large economic ties, if you take, uh, particularly, I would say in countries like Mozambique, where huge gas investments that we've made over there in in the Cabo area, northern Mozambique. Yeah. We've got large diaspora in all these countries, and to some extent, as a nation, we are responsible for their well-being also. So a lot of things align, and we have large ways in which we can contribute towards that further development. Be it in the IT sector, be it in services, be it in finance, be it in security. I mean, just to give you an example, if you take a country like Mauritius, right? uh, if you take a country like Mauritius, I mean, purely as an example, the size of Mauritius is 2,040 square kilometers, right? We are 3.2 million square kilometers. Okay, we are 1,500 times their size, you can say roughly. If you take their population is around 1.2 million. We are 1.4 billion. Okay, more than 1,000 times their size. But if you take the EZ of Mauritius, it is 2.3 million square kilometers. We are 2.1 million square kilometers. They're bigger than us, you know. So you take Seychelles, the situation is quite similar. Population of less than 100,000 people, EZ close to a million square kilometers. So there is a huge capacity shortfall that these countries have. It's tremendous. There's no way they can police these large spaces of the EZ that they have. And therefore, I think to some degree it becomes incumbent upon us that wherever there is an expression of interest from that side, if we have surplus capacities, that we aspire to be a preferred security partner or a net security provider, whatever you call it, then we have to sort of step forward and meet these requirements of theirs, to ensure a certain degree of law and order, prevention of IUU, prevention of, regulated mining activity, undersea mining activity. All this requires a certain amount of footprint, which we, being the large, force over here, are capable of doing, and we need to extend ourselves as desired by these countries to assist them in this process. Yeah.
Right, sir. For the benefit of the audience as well, I wanted to move a little more south, more towards our closest neighbors. Very recently, there have been a lot of political developments, even media outrage around our relation with Maldives, of course, with the India Out campaign, and of course, the kind of Twitter fiascos that went down. Do you think, again, because you very categorically mentioned to the audience that there is a difference between strategic allies and strategic partners. Do you think we are losing out on a strategic partner like Maldives at this moment?
So I think, these undulations in relationships is a way of geopolitics. Elections take place, some regimes or some administrations come in which are more aligned to you, some are less aligned to you. But the fundamentals don't change too much. In a sense, if you are in our close vicinity and if we are in a position to assist you in meeting your developmental needs, it's very difficult for anyone to change that equation, right? If a country happens to be, you know, 200 miles from you, nothing is going to change that. And in case of, any, I would say, event, maybe uh, something related to climate, something related to, a disaster, uh, we are best equipped. And therefore, it's not that I'm saying this from highlighting the asymmetry that exists. I mean, that's a fact. But it is in the interest of both nations, I would say, to use, uh, to leverage proximity to our mutual advantage, right? Uh, Now, within a nation, and insofar as the election process is concerned, a lot of churning goes on, and parties, will try and exploit fault lines, etc., to come into power, right? Uh, but I think once you come into power, you have a clearer realization of geopolitical realities. And therefore, while you might take a very hard stance in coming up to the election process, once you come into power, that becomes much more nuanced, where you're running an administration, and therefore, you're dealing with realities right now, and you're responsible to your own people. So, in that sense, I would say, whatever be your position pre-election, there is always some degree of moderation that takes place post-election. And we're seeing the first signs of that, which are already, I think, but in its larger picture, I think we should be a little accepting of these undulations that take place. Confident in ourselves and confident in the wisdom that exists in other countries around us, that maintaining strong relations is in our mutual benefit. And I'm sure that that's what most rational people think that way, that, it is in our mutual benefit. And while we might have some ups and downs in this, the basic tenet of this relationship remain. Yeah.
Right, sir, absolutely. Well pointed. And the fact that it is election season, not only in India, but a lot of countries are witnessing it. It's actually the largest election season. 60 different countries are going to poll this year. With that, I'm sure hopes, aspirations for more robust regional cooperation are on the high. Do you think multilateral groupings and regional forums like BIMSTEC, like SAARC, especially with respect to South Asian cooperation, are going to see some kind of strategic shifts or winds of change, or is it going to be the same as it has been all these past 5 years of the government?
So I think over the years, there has been a stronger focus on the importance of the maritime domain over the last, couple of decades, I would say. I think a clear realization of the importance of the maritime domain to India. And this is sort of year on year, I would say it is ascending. So, an important and an integral element of that is collaboration, cooperation with your immediate neighborhood, particularly, and your extended neighborhood thereafter. So, you have various instruments, as you pointed out. So, one are, of course, the global instruments under the ambit of, UNCLOS, UN, etc. Then you have the regional instruments, the large regional instruments. So in that, I would say you have IORA and you have IONS, which are pan-Indian Ocean region with observers from outside. And then you have the sub-regional. You have BIMSTEC, you have Mekong Ganga, you have the Colombo Security Conclave. So these are the sub-regional, smaller groupings that you have. Each has got its place. When it comes to the advantage of course, operating under the UN ambit is that it depoliticizes most issues, because now you're looking at it more from a technical, clinical sort of point of view. Uh, the larger structures, take it IONS, take it IORA, they have a similar advantage, but the disadvantage, of course, is the larger the grouping, you come down to the least common denominator is quite a high bar, because everyone has to sign on to whatever you want to do. And therefore, if you're doing, things of concerning maritime security, that is okay. But if you go beyond maritime security into, you want to get into intel, if you want to get, then it becomes that much more difficult. For that, you have to come down to the smaller groupings. You know, so Colombo Security Conclave, for example, is a very tight, 4 or 5 nation grouping. So that becomes, or you go bilateral, is where you have a one. So I would say all these have their place in the entire hierarchy of constructs that you have, and some which are have the advantage of apoliticized and devoid of geopolitics, and some which are much more geopolitical, which are but are much smaller, tighter, forums where you can have much more robust, deeper cooperation and collaboration that you can. And I see all of these with time gaining a little more ascendancy, yeah, and certainly strengthening over the years. Yeah.
I did want to weave in the small aspect of how India has definitely been enhancing its own maritime capabilities, except for the cooperation, our own initiatives like Project 75 and just acquisitions of more advanced, more robust naval assets. Do you think that these developments in any which way are also affecting regional geopolitical power dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, the Indian Ocean is a vast space, 70 million square kilometers. It's colossal, and while we agree that it's impossible for any single nation to sort of be responsible for policing or looking after this entire space, and therefore it has to be a collaborative effort. But in that collaboration, if you want to be a serious player, then you have to come in with strength. You have to come in with capabilities. You have to come in with, a robust footprint. And therefore, for that, you require assets. Otherwise, if you only talk and you're not bringing anything to the table, then no one's going to take you seriously. So, in that sense, we need a strong, robust Navy in all its dimensions, and in all its dimensions, not only in terms of assets, in terms of roles, from an extended policing requirement all the way to, combat capability. So that right across the spectrum of functions, you have to be, I mean, you'll have to maybe prioritize some requirements over others because, you're always operating in a resource constrained environment. But essentially, you have to be seen as a capable force that is that has the ability to come with a reasonably large footprint in an area where an issue arises, like you're seeing right now that is off the Red Sea. We've surged in with 8 to 10 ships, and until some sort of a coalition develops, and then you can reduce your footprint thereafter, and people start putting in and contributions from other nations build up. But right in the beginning, you come with a strong footprint, and thereafter, you wait for. So you take a leading role in these sort of requirements for which you require big time capabilities. Yes, sir.
I think I just lastly wanted to jump in with the China factor. I think it would be unfair not to mention that there will be increasing assertiveness of China in the IORA, and there have been strategic challenges. They have been a bully. Do you think, in any which way, there is room to perhaps foresee some kind of uh, passivity when it comes to our relations with China, especially when it comes to collaborating in the Indian Ocean region?
So I think you have to do it all. You have to firstly have complete awareness of China's increasing footprint in the Indian Ocean region. And that's happening in several domains. It's happening from a military standpoint, with additional ships coming here, grey hulls, with new bases coming up. It's happening, of course, they've always been a large trading nation. It's happening in terms of port development and port investments and port operations in various sort of facilities across the oceans. It's happening in terms of arms sales of Chinese weapons, which are, percolating into our immediate neighborhood in several countries. It's happening in terms of, of fishing. I mean, the largest deepwater fishing fleet belongs to China, etc. And they also, it's happening in terms of survey and research vessels where, at any given time, we find several of their ships operating in the Indian Ocean region. In terms of increased activity for deep sea mining. So in all its dimensions, we're seeing a significant ramp up of, Chinese activities which are taking place over here. And therefore, first thing is to have visibility as what is the footprint and what is the trajectory. Then you have to carry out an assessment as where it is impacting your interests. Uh, there is definitely a huge economic asymmetry that we have, and therefore it will be difficult for you to sort of uh, contest with them in every field, but you have to identify the areas which directly impact your security requirements, and therefore that has to be sort of you have to engage in some sort of contestation in a sense that if it means ramping up your engagement with certain neighbors, etc., so you have to sort of do that. Third, I would say is that you have to keep China also engaged. I mean, you share a common border with China. It's a nation, which we have large economic interests with each other. So that part also there has to be an engagement that has to continue, and in which there has to be. It's unfortunate that we have these border issues, and one hopes that they will get resolved with time. Uh, we have the advantage, I would say, of a unique geography, really, where we share a common border with China, but from a nautical standpoint, we're 4,000 miles apart. We have to come through one of the straits, Malacca, Sunda, Lombok, Mumbai, Qatar. One of these straits you have to come to. And the further east you go, the longer the route becomes. So, from a maritime standpoint, we have a huge advantage that, the Indian Ocean and its countries we have the advantage of proximity. And there, for them, these are all, distant operations there. We can leverage that advantage, in our dealings with China to some extent, and therefore the maritime sphere becomes a very important tool, I would say, in this respect. So your engagement with China will be cross spectrum. You engage them when necessary, and in certain areas where there you sense that it is likely to impact your security needs, then some degree of contestation. I'm not talking about contestation in terms of physical contestation, things like that, but contestation in terms of investments, in terms of engagement that we will have to do, and some maybe in terms of even framing regulatory requirements so that the regime becomes strong, so that you have to operate, whoever operates over here has to operate within certain boundaries which are acceptable to all the regional countries over here. So that can sort of shape up with time. Yeah.
Absolutely, sir. And very rightly pointed out because I think apart from having more knowledge about it, the cross-sector engagement with
Right.
China is important. On a closing note, I think perhaps we just, as an entire team, wanted to ask you, and it was our endeavor to take a little more opinion on the fact that the softer focus of India in terms of issues, perhaps climate risk management being one of those. Do you think that Indian Navy can or is moving towards sustainable maritime practices? If so, apart from the joint naval exercises we spoke about, of course, you did talk about ions before. If quickly we just had to walk through any recent engagements that perhaps the audience would also like to hear about.
So certainly, I mean that every climate has the potential to become an existential challenge for humankind. And therefore, it's important that every responsible player is conscious of your environmental footprint at all times. Uh, as a force, as a navy, the way you impact with the environment firstly can be in terms of your emissions. You have to so your ships have to become much more fuel efficient. You have to adopt modern day techniques so that you're ensuring that your emissions are meeting certain regulatory standards. Your fuel requirements are meeting certain regulatory standards. You're progressively adopting, electric drive because that's much more efficient. It's operationally also better because it gives you a lot more flexibility. Your ships become a lot more silent. So there is, I would say, some degree of coherence between adoption of environmental, uh, lightening your environmental footprint and getting operational advantage at the same time. The second issue is your bases. In all your bases, if you have to adopt, green standards, if you have to go in to the for using renewables to the greatest possible extent to power them, uh, and you're finding that particularly in unnewer bases and certain legacy bases also are sort of changing over, where a strong consciousness as well as a large amount of investment taking place to adopt, a lighter environmental load and adopt green technologies in keeping those going. Third is a much more complex issue is, on acoustics, because this also becomes, acoustic pollution is harmful for fish, for marine life, etc. So there also there's work in play, I would say, as to how to minimize the impact of marine life on your part of emissions, on the frequencies in which you emit, the areas that you're emitting in, stuff like that. So in various fields, I would say there is consciousness and there are actions taking place according to a pre-planned roadmap to reduce our environmental footprint. Yeah.
So there's definitely much, much more
Mm.
hope for the future.
Yeah.
On that note, we will
Mm.
bring this podcast to a close. Thank you so much for sparing so much of your valuable time. I did want to highlight and quickly tell the audience that Sir's penmanship is par excellence. I mean, the amount of publications he has, and I would urge you, especially people watching this on YouTube, we'll link this in the YouTube description. Do have a look and peruse through all the things that Sir has written, and his expert talks are also something you must watch. He is also a speaker extraordinaire. Especially me, I fumbled umpteen amount of times. I think even framing questions, asking him his opinion on a lot of issues that are very topical right now and might be of heaps of interest to a lot of you watching. So, any parting comments? I'm going to request you to come in and to let the audience know if you did enjoy this podcast and if there are any things that they can take away, especially from this.
Thanks, Tanya. I don't think I deserve all that you've said, but it's delightful to be here. My parting shot, I would say, is that, to all people who are viewing this, is retain your maritime focus. I mean, the maritime dimension is the future of this country. Be it, it has been also in the past, but I don't think that realization has sort of really penetrated deep down to everyone. Particularly going ahead, if you take in terms of trade, if you're taking, even if you're talking about, on the service industry, your undersea communications are all taking place on fiber optics, which are all transoceanic, cables which are running all over the place. It's Maritime holds our future in every respect. So I would strongly urge all of you to be engaged in any aspect of it, be it in hydrography, be it in environment, be it in geopolitics, be it in connectivity, in communications, in maritime services, maritime tourism. Uh, it's a great space, and I would strongly encourage you to all participate, read about it, talk about it, and create a greater maritime consciousness in India because that is essential for all of us. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you so much, sir. And on behalf of Team IFPD, we are extremely delighted to have you today. Thank you to all the audience members. You've made it really far. We'll put timestamps and we'd request you to watch the entire video. Thanks, and we'll come up with another podcast, please.